Hi folks, we are going to work through Murach C exercises 16.1, 2, and 3. They're all related, so we're going to do them all in one video. And for my students, this means that you're going to have one submission. So I will let everyone else know when we're done with 16.1 and go on to 2, etc. But right now, we are going to start 16.1, so open up your starter files, which is in the chapter 16 directory. And then it says add XML documentation for each member of the customer class. So let's open up customer.cs. And adding XML documentation, we're going to add it right before the class itself. So I'm going to hit / 3 times, which is the same key as your question mark key without holding down shift. And on the third time, when we do this, it gives us the starting XML documentation. And we are within a comment here. So, just give this some sort of comment. All right, something simple like that. We can add comments for the properties. And that one might not be as useful as maybe this one. All right, so make sure you add it for all of both your constructors, your properties, and the get display text method. I think the one that most students might forget is the XML documentation for the class itself. Your constructor with 3 parameters is the one that will add the param XML as well. So give it the summary, and then, here's where we type in first name of the customer's email address, right? So this is the documentation specifically for this parameter. All right, so go ahead, fill that out. I'm not going to write all that, but that is 16.1. Make sure you save it. And if you are not in my class and your instructor wants you to submit 16.1, once you're done with this, that's when you would do so. We are going to move on, however, into 16.2, create and use a class library. So we're going to create a new class library project named validation lib. So file, new project. And we're looking for a class library project. And we want a Windows Forms class library in C#. All right, so make sure that you have the correct project type. Hit next. This is going to be named validation lib. I need to change where I'm saving it. Okay, and do not place the project and solution in the same directory. All right, I know that for my students, we've been doing that all semester long, but in this case, we're going to actually, in the next exercise, we're going to have multiple projects in the same solution. So make sure that is unchecked. .NET 8. And there we go. All right, and by default, it creates this class 1. Well, we don't want that, so I'm going to take class 1 and delete it. And then the next step is to add the validator.cs from the customer maintenance that we were just working on. But I can't go to project and add existing item. And that's because when I deleted the customer.cs file, my focus automatically moved up to dependencies. So you're going to right click on validation lib, that project, not the solution, validation lib project, the bold thing right here, or just left click on it, right? And then go to project, add existing item, like we have been before. Okay, now I need to find, where did I save this? Mine is 16 customer maintenance. In customer maintenance, I want validator.cs. And I just added that to my project. That was step 1. Step 2 is change the namespace. So instead of namespace customer maintenance, we're now in Murach.validation. And we're going to change this from debug to release and now build our solution. And it builds down here, and we're not going to build complete. Great, no errors. It doesn't run the application though, because there's really nothing to run, right? This is just the validator class. That's all it is. If we want to see that worked, and this is kind of important because we're going to use this later, on the project in the Solution Explorer, I can right click on that, open folder in File Explorer, and I can see that in bin release, .NET 8, there's my DLL. All right, so that is the class library that we're going to be using elsewhere. Okay, that was step 2, and then step 3 is go back to, so open up that chapter 16 customer maintenance solution that you were working on. Remember, you added XML documentation. So I went back to that, and we're going to take validator.cs, and instead of having this file in all of our different projects, I'm going to delete this file. And when I do so, FRM add customer, notice there's errors because the validator is not present. So we're going to add a link to that DLL. So right click on dependencies, add project reference. I'm going to browse, hit browse again. All right, and where did I save that? That's down here, validation lib, bin, release, .NET 8, validation lib. All right, so there we go. I can hit OK, and we are halfway there. We just have to, at the top, say using Murach.validation. So this class is going to use Murach.validation, and now our validator methods are available to us. Okay, and we don't have validator.cs in our project. We have a link to the DLL file that we had created. And then step 4 is test this, run it, test it. We're not going to have to worry about that. It works. So that was 16.2. If you're doing 16.2, this is where you would stop and submit it. But we're going to continue on to 16.3. All right, third or fourth or fifth time's a charm. I'm going to continue on with exercise 16.3. Hopefully this video will edit together nicely because I've had big issues with this, but I figured out a solution. You might call it a workaround, but let's get to it. So 16.3, create and run unit tests. The first thing we're doing is opening the app that's in that validation lib directory. So this is where we were creating that DLL file, and we're going to add a new MS test project called validation lib tests. So to the solution, we want to right click and add a new project. And we want MS test, and you're looking for MS test project in the C# language. There's a lot of other things. There's MS test projects in VB, F#. There's C#, but it's unit test. There's NUnit test in C#. What we want is MS test in C#. And we're going to call this thing validation lib tests. And this project's being created in the same folder as our validation lib. So remember I said when you created the validation lib, do not put the project and solution in the same folder. So here we go. We want .NET 8. That's the only thing I can choose here. And there we have it. Now, we need to add a reference to the validation lib project. So we need this project to know to work with this project. So on validation lib tests, dependencies, I'm going to right click on that and say add project reference. Within this solution, I want you to reference validation lib and hit OK. And we get this little warning here, this little triangle. And if I save everything and I try to build the solution, the error that I get is validation lib targets .NET 8 Windows 8, and this project lib tests is .NET 8, not this Windows 8 thing. So if we look at the target framework for our validation lib, it's .NET 8 Windows, and the target framework for our validation lib tests is just .NET 8. So what we need to do here is add Windows to this. All right, and there's no way to do this that I can find from, when I right click, right? Because that's the only .NET 8, and you might be thinking, oh, change the output type to Windows. You can't. All right, as soon as you change that, it drops back to console application. All right, so we're going to manually change the target framework to .NET 8 Windows. Now that little warning went away. That was the end of step 2. Now, step 3 is saying add a global using directive for Murach.validation namespace to the usings.cs file. I don't have that. So there's two things we can do. Up at the top here, we can say global using Murach.validation. All right, that's one way to handle this. Or in validation lib tests, I can right click, go to properties. Under global usings, I can say Murach.validation and then add the using that way. Okay, either way, perfectly fine. And that would have been step 3. 2 ways to do step 3. Step 4 is to rename this default class file. Don't rename a file when it's open. You're just asking for trouble. So unit test 1, I'm going to right click on it, go to rename, and I'm renaming this to validator tests. And do you want to update all references from unit test 1 to validator tests? Yes, you do. So generally speaking, your test file is going to be named whatever the class that you're testing is, plus the suffix tests. All right, so now we're back in here. Okay, step 5 is rename the default test method, that would be test method 1, to indicate it will test the isWithinRange method that returns an empty string when it receives a valid value. So what are we testing? IsWithinRange, which will, if it is valid, it returns an empty string. So that is now the name of our test method. All right, and we want to arrange, act, and assert. So validator isWithinRange takes in some sort of value, which is what any value that the user entered into the form. So we're going to say that the user entered in 9. And it also takes in the name of that text box. We'll just make something up, price, that's fine. And then 2 values for the minimum, put an equal sign there, and the maximum. So remember, we're not testing whether 9 is within range. What we're testing is, does isWithinRange return an empty string when the value is valid? So what we expect is nothing. So that's all the arranging. Now let's act. We actually want to call isWithinRange. So the result is going to be validator isWithinRange. It takes in the value, the name of the text box, the minimum and maximum values. So we're passing it things that we know should result in a true statement. And then assert. We want to make sure that the expected result is the same as the result that came back. All right, so let's run this test. If I go to test, run all tests, it builds the project. The test succeeded. You can see that this test succeeded. All right. If I set the value to 100, should that work? I think it should. It built, test succeeded. All right, so let's do this. Remember that we are testing not whether this data works, but whether this works. This is within range. And if I look at is within range, it says if the number that you send in is less than or the number is greater than. What if I change these to equal to? All right, so now 100 is equal to 100. So this would run, the message gets set to a message and gets returned. That gets returned into result. Now, is the result equal to an empty string? It is not. So if I test this one, build the project, test it, the test failed. Okay, so again, it's not so much that we're testing the input, you're testing this. You want to make sure that you know that this is valid input. You want to make sure that whoever's maintaining this validator class doesn't screw up this method. That's what your tests are doing. All right, we can undo that. Okay, let's do this again. We're going to, this is going to be a test method. And we want to also, this time, check is within range. And what we want to look for is the method, if the number is too small, it returns an error message. So an invalid too small returns error message. And it's going to be very similar to this. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here. But let's go with the value's 10 and the minimum's 20. Okay, and again, it doesn't matter as long as I know that logically this fails. And what you're expecting, what are you expecting? Is within range. This is what you're expecting. This particular line. And, we don't have line end defined. We should probably define that right here. I feel like that should be available to us from the validator. But anyway, just to make that work. And then we want to make sure that expected is equal to the result. So whatever comes back from this gives us this same string. Well, let's try to test this one. So it built it. It ran our 2 tests, and you can see that these tests both ran successfully. Okay, and then the last one would be use is within range to check see if the value is larger than the maximum. And the easiest way to do this is just to copy this and change some variables, change some names and such. So is invalid to large returns an error message. The number's going to be 101. They must be within those 2 things. We're going to check the range and then assert that this is true. So one last test. There we go. We have all 3 tests are passing. So again, this is making sure that is within range is acting as it would be expected. Okay, and then that would be it for 16.3. You can zip this and submit it. Again, hopefully this video, once I'm done editing, flows smoothly. But good job getting 16 done.